Mr. Rumsey, first of all, just describe this map for us.
Well, it's a 10 by 10 foot map of the entire world that was published in 1587 by a man in Italy named the largest map of the world made during the Renaissance, at the dawn of the modern age. And it's just an extraordinary map. It's never been seen before in its 10 by 10 foot glory. It had only been seen as individual sheets, and we digitized them and put them all together in one gigantic map.
And why do you think that it was never put together before?
Well, before my copy was discovered and that I bought it and gave it to Stanford University, there was only one other copy known, and that was sort of sequestered away in a small library in Milan, Italy. They didn't put it together because it's so precious. You would have had to cut the sheets. It was bound as an atlas, so they never wanted to do it. Although the map maker, Mr. Monte, clearly intended that in his instructions on the map it says, you should put all the pieces together on a 10 by 10 foot board and put a peg in the North Pole in the center of it, put it on a big wall so it can be rotated around.
What he needed was digital technology.
Well, exactly, and now he has it. So I think he'd be very pleased. Carol, it's all hand-drawn, hand-lettered, so it's a very personal kind of product.
I want to get to the art in this in a moment, but just on the level of accuracy, on the science of it, how well does he do? Because 1587, a fair bit is known about the world at this point, but not everything. How does it look?
Well, it looks a bit as we would expect the world to look. Today it's a North Polar projection, so you're looking down at the world, and the whole map is circular. Its depiction of the continents is reasonably accurate for the time. North America is largely unknown in the western parts, but he has North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia. It's especially accurate with regard to Japan because he met with people coming from Japan into Italy in about 1585. So it's highly accurate, and the projection is just extraordinary.
And why do you think? What inspired him to project it from an Arctic point of view or from a pole point of view?
Because although it exaggerates the Antarctic, the Antarctic is quite big at the bottom, although I think he loved that because that was the really unknown part of the world, and it enabled him to populate it with all his fantastic monsters and beasts and so on. But for the rest of the world, it gives a better depiction of the relationship of the continents than the Mercator map does. We know that Mercator distorts hugely in the northern and southern hemispheres. And so Monte's North Polar, it's actually called the North Polar Azimuthal projection, is a more accurate depiction of, these are all trying to put a globe, which is a three-dimensional object, into a flat two-dimensional space. Not easy to do.
And, of course, there are all these arguments that we have now about how map-making has been so Eurocentric for so long. It's about us and about where we saw ourselves in the world, and that diminished the value and the size of so many other parts of the world.
Well, exactly, and that's what's unusual, because for Monte, he was a European. He flourished in Milan, Italy. He was a nobleman. He was a geographer. For him to choose this projection is quite unusual because it almost de-emphasizes Europe when you look at it. I mean, Europe is shown naturally at its size, and it's such a difference between that and the Mercator projection.
As you mentioned, it's also, this map is very characteristic of the time in that it's beautiful. It's a work of art. It has these supernatural creatures, mythical creatures in it. Why would he include that? Why was that so sort of part of that time of map making?
Well, he was like many of his fellow map makers in that regard, although he really went to town with this one in terms of the numbers of monsters and ships and, King Philip of Spain in a huge boat floating in the Atlantic. They didn't like empty spaces, Carol, on their maps, and there were many places that they did not know the names of towns and locations. So they filled them up with trees, monsters. They just used it as a palette And it's so artistic and interesting that it grabs us today.
Who was he, Urbano Monte? What do you know about him?
Well, we know that he came from a noble Milanese family, lived in Milan. He was wealthy enough to spend his life engaged in his passion, which was geography. So he wrote books on geography. He made this map. He taught students. He was quite a fascinating figure. And the only thing that is sad for him is that he was never really able to get this map published. He had family problems. We know that at the end of his life. If the map had been published, then it would be more widely known. So that's why he's been relatively obscure, and that's why all my colleagues in the historical map world are so fascinated that we've been able to find this copy and also put it online. You know, it's now available for everybody to see, both as individual sheets and as the assembled 10-foot map.
Before discussing some of the interesting points regarding this interview with David Ramsay, I'd like to read from his website concerning the map. From November 26, 2017, largest early world map, Monte's 10-foot planisphere of 1587. An extraordinary 60-sheet manuscript world map made in 1587 by Urbano Monte has been added to the David Ramsay Map Collection at Stanford University. At 10 foot square, this map, or planisphere, is the largest known early map of the world. It was hand-drawn by Monte in Milan, Italy, and only one other manuscript copy exists. The digitally joined 60-sheet map image below is the first time the map Monte made has been seen as one unified map, as Monte intended, in the 430 years since it was created. Monte's map reminds us of why historical maps are so important as primary resources. The North Polar Azimuthal projection of his planisphere uses the advanced scientific ideas of his time. The artistry in drawing and decorating the map embodies design at the highest level, and the view of the world then gives us a deep historical resource with the listing of places, the shape of spaces, and a commentary interwoven into the map. Science, art, and history all in one document. Until now, Monte's manuscript map was seen as a series of 60 individual sheets. The only assembled version is a small single-page key sheet of the series. Now that we have joined all 60 sheets digitally, we can appreciate in a new way the extraordinary accomplishment that Monte made. The assembled map, just over 10 feet in diameter, is one of the largest, if not the largest, world map made in the 16th century. The degree of detail and decoration is stunning, and the entire production is surely unique in the history of cartography representation. Monte made his map to serve not only as a geographical tool, but also to show climate, customs, length of day, distances within regions, in other words, to create a universal scientific planisphere. In his dedication on Tavola XL, he specifies how to arrange the sheets of the planisphere and makes it explicit that the whole map was to be stuck on a wooden panel 5.5 braca square, about 10 feet, so that it could be revolved around a central pivot or pin through the North Pole. This was never done, but now we can do it virtually. Monte's 60-sheet world map digitally assembled in a 10-foot planisphere. The reason that I read this opening on the Planisphere homepage is that it really gives us an understanding of the importance of Urbano Monte's work. David's website is phenomenal, the collection is vast, and what he's given us to explore is remarkable. One part of the interview of interest to me was the accuracy of the map. After exploring his collection further, I began to focus on the various shapes of Japan throughout different time periods of his maps. David does indicate that Urbano's depiction of the continents is reasonably accurate for Urbano's time and is particularly accurate regarding Japan, but indicates that the continents, and especially Antarctica, are exaggerated. Looking more closely at Japan in 1587 and now, one would have to say it looks extremely exaggerated compared to other earlier maps and even maps of today. But supposedly Japan was well known and, in David's own words, is accurate. So was Urbano able to get Japan correct and the rest of the world has been exaggerated? I did try to do a bit more research on Urbano's life, but was only able to find an article on a website called Treccani la Cultura Italiana, or Bibliographical Dictionary of Italians. This is an Italian website and is translated by Google. In the first part of his life, Monte created a 4-volume handwritten chronicle entitled Of the Most Notable Things Happened in the City of Milan, whose only known copies are kept at the
Biblioteca Nazionale Braidense,
or the National Braidense Library. In the report, he describes the history of his house, reconstructing the family tree with miniatures made by his own hand, and through it, the vicissitudes of his hometown from 1386, the year in which the progenitor Ambrogio de Monte was born, and the city had begun the construction of the Duomo, or the Cathedral of Milan, to 1587. The work, probably due to its markedly private character, is cited only fleetingly by subsequent chroniclers of the city. However, it is interesting because in the fourth book it deals with the first ambassadors from Japan in 1585 to pay homage to the Pope. Monte reconstructs the pilgrimage of the Japanese delegation, composed of 4 highborn youths and their carers, beginning in the land of the rising sun to Europe, from the stage in India to visits in the Iberian courts to Italy. Landing in Livorno in March, after a stop in Florence, the ambassadors reached Rome, where they received a lavish reception and were invited by the Pope to the consistory. Leaving the Eternal City, they reached many Italian cities in the center, north, to finally reaching the port of Genoa, from which they embarked. In the chronicle, the most original and rich part of details is, of course, the one concerning the stop in Milan, which the ambassadors reached on July 25th, received with all the honors by the authorities and the people. On this occasion, Monte was able to directly observe the Eastern principles and to make portraits of them, which he inserted into the text. The embassy also allowed him to collect the information then available on Japan and to find new information directly from the Jesuit fathers who accompanied him. They were reworked to produce a map with the title, description, and site of Japan. So Urbano should have been able to get accurate information regarding Japan, but when compared to other maps of Japan in the 16th century to the present, the island does not even resemble itself in shape or landmass. Today, Japan is an island group, an archipelago, of 6,852 islands. There are 4 main islands in Japan: Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, and Shikoku. Honshu is the main island and the location of the cities like Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, and Kobe, which has no relationship to what we see on Urbano's map. Actually, when you look at the location of Japan on the Planisphere, not only does the location of the island look off, but the landmass is almost a fifth of North America and a third of the size of the United States. Also, the location looks like it's off the coast of Alaska. This leaves us with perplexing questions concerning the accuracy of the known world, at least from Urbano's point of view, which I cannot answer. But the genius of the work does give us a sense not to automatically discount the accuracy of the map or its relevance. But if David is correct that the map is reasonably correct and proportional for its time, then the real question is, what happened? Actually, what is stunning is that the known landmass on Urbano's map of our world seems to be around 2/3 more, especially when looking at what we consider to be Antarctica. David indicates that the Antarctic is obviously distorted, and Urbano allowed his imagination to run wild, drawing beasts and monsters and so on. They did not like empty spaces on maps in the 16th century, and from looking at other maps in the collection, this is not uncommon. But the areas of the Antarctica that appear really exaggerated are at the top of the map, as viewed on David's website, where it seems Australia should be. On Urbano's Planisphere, there is no Australia that I could find. It is also obvious that when viewing North America, other obvious notables are not depicted, such as the Great Lakes, Hudson Bay, and the Grand Canyon, and I'm sure there are many more I could find if I did more research and was more experienced. So, although I cannot speak to the accuracy of the map, David's overall assessment of Urbano Monte's work, I believe, still deserves more attention concerning what the map is telling us. The discussion really has to start with the idea that Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas in 1492, when Monte's map clearly destroys that notion. My observation tells me that all the sailing vessels clearly indicate navigation of the seas was very well known in the 16th century and probably for thousands of years prior. Also, why would we have to assume that Urbano got some of the creatures that we know even today correct, but others were fantasy? There are still plenty of sea monsters out there in the seas today, or what we consider sea monsters, and plenty of life forms that have bony growths protruding from their head. What I think stands out the most to me is that our Terra looks completely fertile. You really have to look closely for deserts. Today, at least 1/3 of our Earth's known surface is desert or arid, and from Google Earth it looks like much more. Another observation is that there is no indication of ice anywhere, and especially where you would expect it, the Arctic and the Antarctic. Even more spectacular is that it appears there is life everywhere on Terra. Human life. The map clearly shows that our planet was completely occupied with civilization. The one thing that clearly proves this to me is the red symbols on the map that resemble cathedrals. Those are not just symbols of towns and villages, but are the locations of all the cathedrals in the known world. They are in exactly the same places today as they were in 1587. You can find maps today that show the location of cathedrals, and they are also present on similar maps in David's collection from the same time period. Another example of these symbols being used is by cartographer Abraham Ortelius, who lived from 1527 to 1598. These symbols are displayed all over his 1570 World Atlas, also from David's collection. The larger cathedrals are even drawn larger and can additionally have a cross. But I don't know that showing the locations of the greatest buildings on our planet would be unusual in any age. Still, it has to be noted that they are all over the known world as depicted by Urbano's map. How did the greatest structures ever built within the supposedly known assembly line history that we are all taught, which are easily hundreds of years old, be built by a past civilization that we could not possibly produce or replicate today? Yet we are told that when Chris discovered the New World, he was greeted by an inhabitants which were very tribal. How could a tribal culture have been responsible for such remarkable structures? But regardless how they were actually constructed, and regardless of their true history, which is sketchy at best, these symbols are on every continent on the Planisphere. So from Urbano's map, the known world looks very well known. And lastly, just a couple of noteworthy observations that intrigued me were that there are no volcanoes depicted on the map. Volcanoes are nowhere to be seen. However, what can be seen are references to Tartaria all over Eurasia. Coincidence? I don't know. I'm left with more questions than answers.